You scared me, Alexander. I'm like, wait, you're not even shot.
Nah, no, sorry. I'll be right there. Just kind of getting it set up for Monica to help me out here.
Yes.
Thanks for doing that. So kind of you. Very much appreciated.
I'm excited. I'm so glad you're here. That's fine.
So is that okay, Justin? I seated adequately?
Good evening. So quiet in here. I'm just going to take 1 second to introduce my dear friend and former Panther Kill neighbor, Alexander Mallon, who has returned to Menla. This is now probably the 3rd or 4th New Year's that he's come to do this presentation. It's always totally eye-opening for me. I'm like still at the beginner level of astrology, whereas my wife excels at it, and she'll be watching the live stream. Thank you, Justin. Alexander is a very rare mix of someone who is an expert in astrology and is also a really, really accomplished, even though he'll be humble about it, astronomer. Usually the two can't stand each other. And when he was living on Panthergill, he had the largest telescope in the Catskills, and he would bring it up here occasionally for some deep space viewing. And he's passionate about the night sky and really opened my eyes to it in a way that I hadn't had them open before. So I'm just so thrilled that you're here, and I won't waste any more time. And at one point, we will ask for a few volunteers, intrepid volunteers. If you know your astrological information, which is your birth date, your birth time, very important, the place, and then your name. We need those pieces of information, and then he will generate your chart and then talk for about, I don't know, 10 minutes and tell you things about yourself that might amaze you. But if you volunteer to do this, you have to be willing to hear what you might not want to hear. But you might also hear some really wonderful things too that may encourage you on your path. And if there are no intrepid volunteers, I will gladly furnish my information. So, okay, great, excellent. Thank you, Alexander.
Thank you so much, dear Michael. Great to be back here. And thank you, everybody, for coming. Nice to see you. I'm so pleased, too, that the gods have provided this lovely springtime weather out there for a New Year's retreat. It's incredibly wonderful. Last year, we had a couple of 10 below zero nights, and the rest were 5 and 4 below zero. So I'm kind of relieved to come back home and have it be really wonderful and beautiful. And yeah, thank you, Michael, for that beautiful intro. I wish I could, as an avid amateur astronomer, I wish I could all take you out to my observatory that I used to have right down the road. It's just a really great experience to first eyeball see things and to understand, really grounding the sort of conceptual art form of astrology into a visual astronomy experience. And certainly the Catskills are magnificent. One thing that's beautiful about this bowl right below the summit of Panther Mountain in the Catskills here is that we are in a very dark zone. There are very few dark sky zones left around the world, certainly not in the nation. They're quite infrequent to find. And to be so close from Manhattan, 3 hours away, and have this wonderful deep dark sky zone. In fact, indeed, I would sometimes take that really colossal telescope and bring it up to Bel Air Ski Center and set up this huge telescope so you'd be at the eyepiece literally 10 feet off the ground on a ladder. I used to wonder, gee, I'm out here by myself. They do call it Panther Mountain for a reason. A few people have seen them, but they are out there, so it's nothing like little exhilaration with stars and listening for growls. But that site just at Bel Air is actually, I just had returned that particular summer from the South Rim Star Party at the Grand Canyon. So when the skies are really beautiful here, they're just a little bit less beautiful in the Grand Canyon. It's a pretty big statement. So I've traveled around quite a bit. Florida Keys are also super awesome for viewing, but the Catskills are special. And interesting little tidbit too, although science is a little unclear, and Michael can tell you a lot more about it, he's done the research. We're kind of possibly here in the bowl of a meteor crater. Some say about 30,000 years ago.
More like 370 million.
300. Oh,
We're the oldest.
One of the oldest. That's why it's so eroded. It's like now they get a whole different factor. Did they still find nickel deposits, nickel remnants that gave them that sense of it being a?
It was a combination of drilling for, I forget the name of the substance, but that's not terrestrial. And there was an American-Russian scientist who became obsessed with figuring out why Panther Mountain is a circular mountain. So if you look at a map, you'll see that it's a 7-mile wide circular formation, and there are streams sort of flowing all around it. And that's because it's an inverted impact crater. And so he got some money together and did some drilling to find these core samples. And he also measured the gravitational field and discovered that it was less than normal by 0.2%. And so he surmised that this was because to create a 7-mile wide crater, you need a huge meteor. And it's been estimated to have been about a half-mile wide, the meteor itself. So when it crashed here, at a time when the Catskills were still under a shallow sea and the dinosaurs, or I think it might have been before dinosaurs, it created this massive explosion, like, A-bombs going off, and it literally pulverized the bedrock. So there's less solid mass underneath us, and therefore the gravitational field is a little less than it should be. So I like to tell people we have an instant weight loss program at Mallon. You come here and you weigh less than you do at home.
Which, instant weight loss in Menla and a lower gravitational field, and you can actually feel it. There's a kind of an incredible vibe in this particular bowl right below Panther Mountain. It's really wonderful, and when you hike it during the day, it's a magical spot. But that's a great intro for the Woodstock bumper sticker, which reads, "We're all here because they're not all there," which I always trace out for most of my clients because it's kind of the nature of human experience. We're all here because they're not all there. We're all of us are work in progress. That's of course what we're about. And astrology is this incredible art form. So really briefly, a few things. Michael, I thought perhaps I should not do what I normally do because I can go on and on, like some other people we know. And so I want to be sure that I don't normally do that. That usually runs us way deep into the evening. But I'm going to try to make my presentation a little quicker, give you some foundations and bones. Really, the issue I do when I lecture with all of you and with most of my clients is literally try and teach you some of the foundations of astrology and do it really quickly so that you can follow. When we start getting into charts, you can perhaps move along with us. Not easy to do, but I'm quite adept at it, all these decades of practice. So we got this idea, we're all here because we're not all there, that we're all a work in progress, that our charts are a mirror of our soul and spiritual progress. Many years ago, Michael and I had created a program here, and Michael and I concocted this idea of astrology East meets West. And Bob and Michael brought in, I'm trying to remember, it wasn't Jamin, what was his name?
It was John McKelson.
John McKelson,
who's a Tibetan astrologer, and Camilla Sutton, who's a Vedic astrologer. And we had another Western astrologer.
18 men.
And we had all of them were analyzing charts from their own traditions, And even though they're different, like you're a different sign in your Vedic astrology, the results were very similar, which, you know, kind of blew everyone's mind.
Yeah, the thing that was really amazing was the Tibetan astrologer in Tibet. Apparently, they do something no other astrological construct does in the West, which is to literally have university studies. There are some actually university studies, British Astrological Faculty and the NCGR here in the U.S. There are a number of repositories of pretty high knowledge and really scholarly. I'm not a scholarly astrologer. I'm really an eyepiece at the telescope kind of astrologer, astronomer. But Japa-Kelsey definitely brought these incredible ideas that one of the first things a Tibetan astrologer does, totally like the antithesis of Western, is to predict when you're going to die. So you can understand what you need to work on and how much time you have to self-discover and self-actualize. But here in the West, unlike Vedic and Hindu ideas, it's really about the egoic self, your sun sign, your ego sign. So, thank you, Mallon. Monica's volunteering to help us today. So here we are. Yeah, thank you, Monica. So here we are, Winter Solstice Retreat 2018 into 19. And the idea of winter solstice is this really deep, embedded, like all real astrological ideas, astrology, Western astrology being seasonal. So when we talk about charts, I really want you to start thinking about, when we get into birth signs, seasons. Your birth sign is shorthand for a season. I'll get onto that a little bit. Also, too, there are a couple of interesting things. There are a number of eclipse cycles that are happening every year. This year we have 5 eclipses, usually 4. The first is a lunar eclipse, total lunar eclipse, visible all over the U.S. Begins totality or thereabouts around 10:30 in the evening on January 20th. This coming January 20th. The last visible total solar eclipse until like 2024, something like this. So get out there if it's clear. Let's pray for clear. And look at this beautiful solar eclipse. And of course, you can see that ashen colored light. There's been so many volcanic eruptions, as we might have heard. Many of you are probably pretty news informed. And lots is happening, rocking and rolling around the planet. And of course, astrology mirrors everything, including that. So we can tell by that ashen color, whether it's really coppery or more bluish, what kind of suspended solids we have in the upper atmosphere. And we're going to see probably this one, I'm going to guess, is going to be more grayish bluish, but who knows? It's one of those kind of delights of astronomy. You never know what you're going to get when you get out there. A pair of binoculars is always recommended for meteor showers, but particularly lunar eclipses. So January 20th, the night of January 20th into the 21st, starting at 10:30, I think mid-eclipse is 11:30 at night here in the East Coast. So we'll talk about those eclipses, which are all happening in the signs of Capricorn and Cancer. Capricorn, wintertime sign, Cancer, summertime sign. So that axis for the year of 2019 is Cancer, Capricorn, Capricorn, Cancer. We're just transitioning from Leo, Aquarius, that axis of last year. And those of you who might have studied astrology, like Monica, for about a decade, Leo cycles, Leo, the dead of summer. How do you understand these different birth signs? Like mom's pregnant for 9 months. And for a Leo, gives birth to a baby in the middle of summer, above the equator, in the middle of summertime. Normally you've got lots of family members and people traveling to see this birth, this beautiful baby. And that newborn baby is a July, August baby, a Leo baby, gets lots of attention right away. It's in the spotlight. People are partying. The sun sets at 10 p.m. Lots of margaritas and lots of wine happening. People are peeling up the layers. There's big party and fun. And so when you look at nature, as I did as an amateur astronomer, telescope builder, when you study astrology from a natural standpoint, astrology is all about nature. It's all about nature. It's a mirror of nature. So if you are a newborn infant, and your first imprint is middle of summer, partying and backyard parties and family gatherings and everyone's oogling and ogling your existence, you're imprinted with life is abundant, summertime babies, spring into summer, abundance, extroverts, fall into winter, introverts, by and large. So I always say that poster child for Leo, Bill Clinton, I always joke, saxophones, dress stains, all kinds of great cigars, it's all going to be fine, nothing to worry about here, nothing to see. It's all good. Leos are all groovy and upbeat and fun. So each sun sign is really a season, a seasonal social imprint. So we're in winter season here, and this eclipse, this wintertime eclipse of January 20th, Capricorn into Aquarius, wintertime signs, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Cancer, Leo, opposite that. So those are the kind of 4 signs that are really pulled into this eclipse cycle very intensely for 2019. 4 elements: air, earth, fire, water. Air, earth, fire, water. Everyone's born under one of those elements, one of those sub-seasons. So, springtime, early springtime. I always use this as an idea. Literally, I used to live right down the road, my observatory, walking distance from here. And we had April 1st, literally about 3 or 4 feet of hardpack, snowpack from the winter. April Fools, we got 9 inches of rain. And those little tiny streams are so beautiful and so tranquil, turn into the Colorado River in a heartbeat. So the end of winter time is that snow, the hardpack, it's energy building. We can smell if spring's about to arrive. We can kind of sense spring is going to come. The sign of Pisces, intuition, sensing that spring is nearby, but somehow not quite here. And then April, boom, Aries, it punches through with a roar, usually. So air, earth, fire, water. Air, earth, fire, water. Every sign of the zodiac is one of those 4 elements. Fire signs: Aries, Leo, Sag. Aries, Leo, Sag. Fire signs. Aries, the beginning of seed form that has survived freezing, potent, full of life. Aries, springtime, March into April. Leo, the dead of summer, the intense sun. Sag, you light the hearth, you light the fire in the winter solstice, where the sun rises again, and the sun, S-U-N, will rise, and the S-O-N of God, Son of God, will rise, the solstice time. So fire signs: Aries, Leo, Sag, Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn, earth signs, down to earth. Air signs: Gemini, Libra, Aquarius, air sign, conceptual. Water signs: Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces. These are all sub-seasons during which you're born that has a social, sociological, calendrical, environmental pregnancy to it. As an example, kind of obscure. If you're born into May into June, you're a Gemini. What's happening May into June? Not really exactly lecturing, rhetorically. What's happening, not rhetorical rather, what's happening May into June for most culture, most of us Western culture? What are we doing May, June? End of school. But before the end of school, you've got exams. So before summertime begins, there's intellectualization, there's exams, there's studying, there's intense intellectualization. Gemini, air sign, intellectual, conceptual, intellectual. Children that are born during that time are imprinted by that social dynamic. Dead of summer, Leos. It's that social dynamic of the sun, of party, of fun, of social congress. Capricorn, like myself, January 7th in my case, in the dead of winter. Or as I say, if you're a Capricorn Aquarian and you're born in Fargo, North Dakota, and it's 20 below zero, 2 or 3 weeks, nobody's flying in for your birth. No one's coming to check out what's happening to this birth. They can get to Fargo at all. Wintertime babies are more internal. It's about survival. Summertime, springtime are about thriving. So astrology is this incredible mirror that the ancients came up with that's logical. Whereas I say, if you're XX chromosome, I can tell you from most of this room, 27 and a quarter days. It has meaning to you. Doesn't have the same meaning to me in this incarnation. But if I say 27 and a quarter days to most of you sitting here, yeah, that's a cycle that we know, a monthly cycle. So astrology mirrors these natural cycles. That's what it's all about. Air, earth, fire, water.
But what about the southern hemisphere?
This is a great one, and I love that because, of course, being an amateur astronomer, what about the southern hemisphere? I think there's a lot of research that needs to be done because, one, it really, if you're down at the bottom of South America, you're experiencing winter in July and August. One would presume, since a Western zodiac is all about seasonal social imprint, that there must be an inverse. But oddly enough, it isn't. And I have an idea why. Right now, the Western world is experiencing, New Year's and Christmas time. Whether you're down below or above the equator, that's the mechanism that it's run by. So when corporate America shuts down in August, that's kind of how the world operates, you know, there's a group think behind it. All I can tell you, because I've not done enough research myself, and there's a huge astrological community in Australia, particularly in New Zealand. There's a locally famous guy, he had been an opera star in the Sydney Opera House. He's a Leo, and if ever there was a perfect Leonian, he is it. You know, booming voice, loves the spotlight, and he's this incredibly vivacious, entertaining personality, like hyper Leo, in fact, and he was born in Christchurch. So go figure, you know, but there is this idea of social, cultural imprinting. So yeah, it's a great question. As above, so below, down below. Shouldn't we be inverse with seasons? But oddly enough, it's not that way. So here we see it laid out for us. All the different signs of the zodiac, what your element is, and also what your quality is. There are 3 qualities which are cardinal, action-oriented, fixed, which of course has got fixity, and mutable, changeable. And then of course, you see all the different elements for each sign of the zodiac. So when you think about people you've partnered with, if you're a fire sign and you've married or partnered with a water sign, gee, how does that work out? Fire and water make steam, or earth and fire make lava. You know, there are certain generalities. We're talking about the sun signs, we're talking about egoic consciousness, like the light of the sun, light of consciousness. So the sun signs are really super general. You got to look at a whole chart, a whole person, when you start getting into this work. But these premises are kind of foundational. It's really like your ego consciousness, whatever subseason you're imprinted by, Leo or Taurus or Cancer, whatever, that cultural imprinting is quite foundational. If you're a fire sign, your imprint is action. That if you want to have something or do something or be something, go do it, make it happen. If you're an earth sign, you've got to earn it and build it and have it tangibly in front of you. If you're an air sign, conceptual, if I believe it, it's true, I can conceptualize it and I can make it happen. And water sign, if I feel it, it's true. Meaning, if I feel you love me, then everything's good. And if I feel you don't love me, then you don't really love me. You know, water signs go strictly by feeling. So you could say 4 realities, air, earth, fire, water, 4 conceptual realities that we're all born into. It's really, again, about nature and seasonal change. Air, earth, fire, water, winter, spring, summer, fall. And so this idea of as above, so below, this idea that the inner and outer man are the same. These days, you know, I'll loosely sort of address it as quantum physics. What do you know? The ancients, you know, or as I say, you know, genius wasn't born yesterday. There were some geniuses a few thousand years ago too. And understanding nature. Some people say, well, how old is astrology? Well, technically, astrology is about 5,000 years old. King Ramses II. But astrology really is the experience of nature, just the study and experience of cycles, 27.25 days. That didn't happen yesterday. So I say astrology is like fire and stars. It's as old as fire and stars, as, you know, hunting and gathering and relying upon the environment and how you can interweave with the environment you're born into. That's what astrology is a mirror of. And this happens quite literally, as above, so below. Literally in sort of like this replicant of a DNA helix, the sun in its path through the galactic core. We're in the outer arms of our galaxy in this case, but everything is moving, everything is spinning, everything has got this sort of rhythm to it in God's creation, including the sun. So of course we know we orbit the sun. The sun also orbits its own little epicenter, and the whole system moves through time and space around the galaxy as the galaxy spins. The sun itself, all stars do, they move in proper motion. And they move in kind of this cyclical, kind of spiral shape, which when you have a great graphic, which I couldn't pull up, you know, a nice little movie, you see everything moving around and moving through time and space together. And it forms this interesting, curious shape that we see, that we know a lot of these days, the double helix. As above, so below. You know, where you get an electron microscope and dig deeper and deeper, and you discover lots of replications of God, you know, different manifestations, different forms. You point the Hubble telescope to a dime-sized patch in Hercules, and you expose for 3 days, and you see what had been black. Suddenly, millions of galaxies. So where does God begin? Where does God end? Where does creation begin? Where does creation end? Where does consciousness begin? Where does consciousness end? And so this idea of as above, so below, you know, those of us who know meditational yogic practices, you know, the body, the organ systems, the ganglion along the spine, the chakra systems that are coincidental with them, all about consciousness. Every part of God's creation is conscious in its own way. Every part of our being, our body is conscious in its own unique way also. This idea of tantra is a good example. Coming together with your partner. And what is it you're really after is that sense of consciousness, tantra. So here at the winter solstice, we have this phenomenon of the noontime sun being very, very low in the southern sky. And of course, summer solstice, the noontime sun is very, very high in the southern sky. And everything in between with the equinoctial points, spring and fall. And so, of course, in megalithic structures like Stonehenge, they mark these positions of the sun, sunrise, the winter solstice. It's all about the sun standing still. It's all about that sun reaching its lowest point at noon, and then after this December 21st, every year, growing higher and higher and higher every noon hour. So winter solstice is the time of sort of the lowest sun, the longest night, the shortest day. So again, inner and outer. Inner and outer. What's the coincidence of people born during the winter solstice? Sagittarians, fire signs. Capricorn, earth sign, stability. Sagittarius, fire sign, the sign of people who love to party and have fun. It's literally lighting the hearth of consciousness, lighting the fire, lighting the tree. This idea of celebrating that the sun will get higher and higher every noon, lighting the inner fire, the sense of spiritual awakening, spiritual awareness. Our gathering here every year on December 21st is to celebrate inner awakening, awakening the inner flame. The next sign over from Sag, Capricorn, January, is about the energy going into the roots of the tree. The energy of oneself going into one's inner being, inner roots. Astrology and this idea of concepts or coincidence is really important when you start looking at charts. That's why I said at the outset, when you think about your sun sign, what element are you born onto? When you think about your sun sign, think about you being part of a 12-month growing cycle, from seed to sprouting, to fruition, to harvest, to death, and a Scorpio, when insects that can't survive below zero begin to die, and the energy goes into the roots in the dead of winter again, the solstice, when the energy goes within and is sort of deeply in the Muladhara and sort of stored in one's inner being. Of course, the last couple of years have been quite interesting. Remember 2012, the Mayan calendar, and that things would change and their calendar ended, it was a big deal. Well, it kind of was, because that time the winter solstice sun crosses the galactic plane. It's that winter solstice sun in Capricorn, Sagittarius, crossing the center of our galaxy. If you guys have ever been out looking at the Milky Way in the summertime, and you've seen the Milky Way beautiful across the starry sky, across the heavens, and down on the south you see the big cluster of the Milky Way in Sagittarius, the heart of our galaxy, the central core of our galaxy. So the idea was when the winter solstice sun crosses this point, really once in a 26,000 year cycle, something big will happen. It's actually been a multi-decade cycle. It began like around 1982, when this winter solstice sun happened to cross that angle. So for the better part of the late 80s into the early 21st century, we see this particular phenomenon of the winter solstice sun crossing that galactic center, something kind of coming to our conscious center. It's like a sort of a galactic awakening, the end of the Mayan calendar. That particular point right now is being intensely fired up. Two planets, Pluto, that has a 246-year cycle, and Saturn, a 30-year cycle, joined together. 246 years. Every nation goes through a major death rebirth every 246 years. The USA is how old? 246 years. We're having a Pluto return. This time of last winter solstice of 2018, this of 2019 and 2020. Saturn-Pluto, 30-year orbit for Saturn. Pluto, first time in 246 years, coming back to where it was when the nation was born. So it's ostensibly a rebirth, a reboot, Pluto back where it was when the USA was born, of Pluto factors. And what's Pluto? Well, Pluto was discovered when they discovered plutonium, 1930. And also 1930, 1931, 32, Germany, the rise of the Third Reich. One could say absolute, power and the need for sort of controlling that power. Absolute, some say absolute evil versus absolute good. Pluto themes, plutonium, like literally the atom bomb, So Pluto's a big energy. It's a big planetary energy. Pluto coming back to where it was for the first time now in 246 years for the USA chart. So where Pluto is in your chart, where it falls in your personal chart, when I go through some charts here, this has got that same sort of power, that same punch. Translated into real terms, have you noticed the last decade has been pretty intense? Have you noticed the last 5, 10 years particularly has been growing in intensity? Have you noticed the last few years especially, as Saturn has gotten closer and closer to Pluto to be quite intense? Saturn governs structure. Every 7 years, wherever Saturn is when you're born, Saturn makes a square or an opposition or a square, or comes back to what's called Saturn return every 30 years, 30-year orbit for Saturn. Saturn governs structures like developmental milestones. 8, 7, 14, 21. These are major developmental times for all of us. Developmental times of consciousness. So Saturn's about developmental milestones, and Pluto, plutonium, Pluto is about sort of inner transformation. So the principle of maturation, Saturn comes together with Pluto, plutonium, deep emotional, deep psychic awakening. Pluto also deals with plutocracy. Saturn is structure, Pluto plutocracy. So restructuring of plutocracy. And I'll point out shortly how this is really one of those power cycles. So how it hits your personal charts is important, and how it also hits international charts is really important as well. That Uranus-Pluto square, well, they were together, Uranus and Pluto, during the 1960s. Uranus discovered during the times of revolution, American and industrial revolutions. Uranus was coincident with revolution, Pluto, plutonium. So that was Uranus-Pluto together in the 1960s. The first major configuration that we were having with Uranus-Pluto, revolution, and deep plutonium, deep death rebirth, this is the first major test of Uranus-Pluto since the end of the 1960s. So the last few years, since 2012, we've had this kind of rebirth of the 60s. And we've seen it with cultural changes. We've seen it with issues about race and race relations. We've seen it with Roe v. Wade coming back again for, rebuttal and question. We see this idea of sort of rebooting, and even I would say, frankly, kind of youth culture of today, these days is kind of, it's a repeat in Williamsburg and has been for the last decade, much similar to what they had in Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco area back in the 60s. We're having kind of this reboot, the principle of revolution, Uranus and Pluto, deep internal psychic rebooting. Those two, that pair, are still in action right now. We're part of the juice of 2019. What's happening right now is like this revolutionary cauldron. It's been stewing and brewing since 2012 especially, and it's really coming to like the power spot, the juice point in 2019 into 20. These years, 18, 19, and 20, this is it. These are like the big, big, big turning points for international and cultural kind of renaissance. Also, too, the sign of Cancer, Gemini Cancer, the sign of Sagittarius Capricorn. The ancients said the gate of man, the gate of God. In other words, wintertime signs, Sagittarius Capricorn, December, January, the gate of God, when souls depart, or when we focus on one's soul, the nature of soul, the nature of spirit. We light the fire to remember awakening of soul. This is a time of the individual, internal man, the evening, the nighttime of wintertime. Summertime, the gate of man, where creatures and people are sort of out in the world. What will I do when the winter goes away? Springtime, summertime signs are always about the outer world. What will I do when I get out of this cabin? And how can I create my life, springtime, summer, to capture my desire? But fall, winter is about the collective. What do we do? How do we work together throughout the winter? So these two polarities of one's inner consciousness, the winter going within, and one's outer world, that's the dynamic. We have solar eclipses. Remember I said Capricorn winter, Cancer summertime signs. Those two polarities this year, 2019, are like front and center. Your individual family and your social collective family. Those are the themes of 2019. Always a balance. Always about balance. And these eclipses, again, like balance. You know, where the Earth's in the center and the Earth and a lunar eclipse, the moon and sun are opposite to each other. Gives us this beautiful solar eclipse in this case, and lunar eclipse on January 20th. And these little things, when you look at a chart, they're called the moon's nodes. N-O-D-E, moon's nodes. They're karmic points. The north node always opposite. So when your personal birth chart, when you bring your charts up, some of you can do a handful tonight, the nodes, north node on one side, south node on the other, they deal with karma. Actually, specifically, the north node is about Dharma, what you're here, the heavy lifting, what you're going to do to sort of find your path, what your essential path is in this incarnation. The south node is about karma, sort of habituation. So when you look at a birth chart, you can sort of see and tell what your storyline has been throughout incarnations in terms of habituated ease, habituated sort of comfortability, where you're comfortable, what you automatically do, your autopilot, versus what you're here to really learn, the Dharma. That north node place is really important. That's important too because in the sky, that south node, that nodal axis is a 20-year cycle roughly. So for the USA chart, Pluto is coming back to where Pluto was when the USA was born, first time in 246 years. A reboot about power. Saturn structure is coming to meet that in the USA chart. And the south node of karma is also right there. Karma, Pluto, depth, power, and plutocracy. Saturn, structure. That's right on the USA chart at this point, and the chart of many other nations, as I'll show you in a second. It's also somewhere on your chart. Everybody's going through this right now together. Somewhere in your life, whether it's your family and home, bottom of the chart, or your career, the outer top part of your chart, or your individual body, yourself, or others in your life, somewhere this principle of deep, powerful restructuring and reboot is happening for everybody here. That's been the case for the last 5 years, particularly as these cycles, Uranus, Pluto, Saturn, have been doing their orbital thing, orbital dance. Again, cycles are just that. The moon cycle around the Earth, doesn't necessarily create menses for women. It's just a coincident cycle. It's just a cycle that in nature is part of the flow of things. So these Saturn cycles, Pluto cycles, it's all just different mirrors of nature. Also, too, this past year, has anybody noticed this past spring, a brilliant red star in the southeast sky? It was super bright. The last time we saw that star that bright was 2003. That was the planet Mars. So 2003, and presently 2018, Mars was closer than it had been to the Earth in 65,000 years. So if Venus is the goddess of love, Mars is the god of war. That's right. So, a lot of astronomers, people that I hang out with, astronomers only, not astrologers. Astronomers said, oh, it's astrology nonsense. I mean, what's happening? It's so different. It's 2003, and Mars is super bright. And okay, so Mars is the god of war. What's the big deal? Mars is beautiful and bright. It has no particular meaning, does it? Anybody history, a student of history here? 2003 coincided with...
Iraq.
That's right, the Gulf Wars. The Gulf Wars began in 2003, and they never quite stopped, have they? So we've had this major Mars cycle. Mars closer than it's been to the Earth in 65,000 years in 2003, and its second closest approach just now, this past springtime. We had a major Mars-Venus relationship this past year. Venus was retrograde, Mars was retrograde, meaning they slow down in their orbits compared to us in kind of a way. And they're powerfully positioned with each other. So 2018 was about relationship and sexuality. So Venus is the goddess of love, Mars the god of war. Venus is about feminine power, Mars sexual power. In Judeo-Christian mysticism, The circle is spirit, like the sun in the birth chart. The circle of spirit and the cross of matter. So with Venus, like the female sign in the bathroom, the circle of spirit presides over the cross of matter. That means that for women, in general, what you feel is more dominant or more important to you in your consciousness than what you can materially execute. And with men, vice versa, the cross of matter dominates over the circle of spirit. Meaning, if I was inducted into the military, Alexander, take that rifle and get out there and shoot those guys. That's the dominant, cross of matter over what I feel about it, Mars. So Mars and Venus were doing a powerful dance in the sky last year, 2018. Was there any kind of interesting corollary theme happening collectively? Well, the Me Too campaign was a big corollary theme. Feminine power, masculine power, what it means to be a male or a female, what it means to be culturally male or female, or anything in between. 2018 was a really big year about identity and about cultural, romantic, social, relational identity. We're still kind of coming off that bigger cycle in 2019. So again, these principles, the balance, seeking balance of love, seeking balance of relationships, seeking balance of oneself is a big part of the program, this continuing time period. So some big things are happening. Some big things are happening. There are a lot of big things that have been going on for quite a while. We're kind of getting used to big things happening. Last decade, we're kind of getting used to, I sort of say, go back a few years, a handful of years, and Democratic political presidential candidate Howard Dean in a rally sort of went yeehaw, and the whole world fell apart for his Democratic candidacy. But apparently candidates can do all kinds of things a lot more intense than yell yeehaw and have still become elected. There's all kinds of powerful things happening. One of the more powerful things happening, I think, for 2018 to 19 is this fellow right here. Who knows the story?
GMO humans.
That's right, GMO. So the tampering with the human genome. So this doctor in China literally did what? Who knows the story? Twins.
Claims.
He claims it. He claims it. Right? He claims it. And the claim is that he took twins and implanted them in a lady's uterus, and one egg was treated for AIDS because the father had HIV positive, and one was not. Kind of playing God. I think that this is perhaps the most important event of 2018-19. This idea of the human genome and what we are doing with the human genome. What's next for us? This is a major, major leap of consciousness. Again, Uranus and Pluto, these planets that were discovered, all these planets that we're talking about were discovered when we had the Industrial Revolution, the invention of a telescope, the invention of a microscope, the invention of chemistry, the invention of pharmacology. All these themes of modernity and science were birthed in the last few hundred years. Now that's what these cycles we're talking about today are all about. This intensification of kind of the quickening, the awakening. We've gone with our smartphones from calculating things by hand to communicating worldwide in seconds. The norm for our 7 and 8-year-old kids is making friends around the globe, around the world. So on the one hand, technology has opened us up. On the other hand, it's opened up some very powerful questions to ask ourselves. Especially as, by the way, most of us are having clothing or shoes that have chips in them. So the manufacturer of those clothes and shoes and clothing items can track the sales, but there are other implications behind that as well, aren't there? We're coming into an Orwellian time, I think. All kinds of things are changing. Big things are happening. Global changes. Right now, there are many volcanic eruptions. There are many earth changes that are, in fact, intensifying. Some global scientists say that there is global warming. Many say it. Many say that we have a global warming cycle that goes into a global cooling, an ice age or a mini ice age. So things are really powerfully, literally heating up. We do all know that the shipping lanes in Siberia, the Russians are real thrilled because the Arctic ice pack is, massively blown apart and shifted. Everything is literally shifting here beneath our feet. Global conflicts, 65 million refugees these past couple of years. And the population, 7 billion people and growing. So it's really kind of more and more a one world phenomenon. And we really have to see how we can support. Of course, Elon Musk and Tesla, and also too, space travel, SpaceX, the potential for average people to orbit the Earth and go into orbit. All kinds of incredible 21st century themes happening at the very beginning of the 21st century. These are literally sci-fi ideas coming alive right in front of us, happening super fast, and faster. And as computers get faster and faster, it speeds up even more quickly. I always ask, are we spiritually evolving or emotionally evolving in any particular way that can sort of match this intense intellectual terabyte information culture we've created? We have different ideas of what's out there. We have different ideas of who we are, different ideas of what's going on with the world and who symbolizes what to us. You know, what people are all about. This little gag comic strip thing of Trump World Map, you know, talks about the big water and the ungrateful Puerto Ricans and, you know, different ideas that people have that are also really being rested. So when we talk about Pluto-Saturn cycles particularly, it's about the structural Saturn-Pluto, structural plutocracy, rebooting in some particular way. And that's what we have. Structural plutocracy, rebooting. And we're back to almost sort of a Cold War standoff that we thought we left behind with Gorbachev. Things are rebooting. It's a different version of the 50s and 60s that's rebooting. The idea of more walls. We thought that we had gotten rid of walls back in the 50s and 60s, but no. Considering what we can do to wall each other off to reduce conflicts, but instead conflicts grow. So Pluto rules the plutocracy and plutocrats. Pluto's transit through mid-Capricorn last happened in 1767 through 1768. That was the beginning of the Revolutionary War. Of course, well, we all know what happened in 1776, right? The last time that Pluto was in Capricorn. The last time that Pluto was in Capricorn. Our nation was born, and now we're ready for a reboot of plutocracy. By the way, in 1767 rather, during that year or two, the planets Saturn, structure, and Pluto were opposite each other. That was the same exact pattern we had in 9/11, where structure and plutocracy were facing off, if you will. We're at sort of a balance point. This restructuring issue was at stake during 9/11. As an example, Great Britain's global dominance was challenged in the late 1700s. The USA, of course, broke away. It's been said that history often repeats itself. So how does this correlate? Pluto was in Capricorn the last time when nations had risen to great world power. Of course, as an example, the British Empire began to shed that world power. Some say the U.S. is poised for that same kind of a shift. Saturn is structure and conservative viewpoints, joining Pluto of plutocracy. It's all about consciousness, though. It's all about raising vibrations. Very popular in sort of the metaphysical, spiritual realm out there is the work of Abraham Hicks. Anyone heard of it? Abraham Hicks has popularized this idea, nothing new under the sun, of your own vibratory consciousness. And where do you place your mind? Where do you place awareness? Where do you place your focus of self? Where do you place your focus of consciousness? What do you believe yourself to be? Who do you believe yourself to be? Who do you believe your world to be? What do you believe to be about? So this idea of minding our minds, minding our awareness, is really essential, minding our inner resonance. Astrology is about resonance. Percy Seymour was a cosmologist back in the 60s and 70s who postulated that astrology might work not through one of the four forces of nature like physics gives us, but maybe through resonance. Kind of, he says, like you could have a loud sound playing, but a beautiful glass on the piano is not going to shatter, but a certain resonance or pitch, that will do the trick. So astrology is about resonance. Why these cycles, how they mirror our own development. It's really about resonance and what level or where our consciousness, how it's vibrating, if you will. So that's a chart. That's what a chart looks like. Before we get into your personal charts, the chart has an upper half and a lower half. I grew up in Long Island, so that middle line, if you were on Long Island looking south over the ocean a few miles out is a perfect flat straight line, that earth you're born onto. And so you have sunrise point in the east, culmination at noon in the south, sunset in the west. Noon hour at the top, midnight hour at the bottom. So this person's got all their planets in the top of the chart. Are they an extrovert or introvert? Extrovert. They are an Aries, born into springtime, summertime. Is that an extrovert or introvert? Extrovert. So a simple theme here is, well, what season are you born into? Springtime into summer, basically extrovert. Daytime baby versus nighttime, daytime is extrovert. Bottom of the chart, nighttime is introvert. I'm a Capricorn baby, January 7th, born at 9 o'clock at night. I'm an introverted introvert primarily. So a quick way to understand a chart is a person a daytime baby, extrovert. Is a person nighttime baby, introvert. Is a person born at noon hour, outer world oriented. Is a person born at sunrise, self, waking self. Is a person born at sunset, other, like George W., sunrise baby, waking self. I'm the decider, I'm the president. Sunset baby, Barack Obama, reaching across the aisle, coming back to the dinner table, negotiation. If you've done your whole day hunting gathering, at the evening point, you come back to the dinner table. If you're born sunrise, you're waking up about self, re-embodying self, and stepping into the outer world. Midnight, bottom of the chart, about internal world, internal life. Think about children if you have kids, what time of day they were born. And you'll see this basic model works like super, super well, 95% of the time, dead on. So the ancients would talk about what time of day you're born, just like a giant sundial. And these quadrants, the first quadrant that is below, that's sort of midnight to waking, midnight to rising. Where are you at midnight? In bed, in your nest. All about personal life, personal healing, body processes, healing of consciousness, dream state. So that midnight to waking, that first quadrant of the chart is about self. Waking to noon hour is about social collective, stepping out into your job, stepping out into business meetings, going to your boss meeting or your job meeting. What will we do today? The collective. Waking to midday. Midday to sunset point. What have we earned? What have we hunted and gathered? How have we been part of the collective successfully? Sunset to midnight, back home with the children, with family, entertainment, taking in, connecting the inner world. So the US chart, if we have the right time of birth, some conjecture it's a different time of day. July 4th, 1776, 5:10 p.m. Our focal point as a Cancer sun sign, July 4th, summertime, we are about family. We are about a global family, US. That's the premise of the US, global family. And it's a sunset birth, US chart. A global family that's about partnering and connecting with others. Not about self, not about what we want or our personal individual power as a nation. It's really ideally about how we can make a family in a partnering kind of a way. Cooperation. Notice that, by the way, the moon down here in the USA chart is at the bottom of the chart. It's about the nest. It's kind of like saying the nest, and Pluto here too. Pluto, power, the nest opposite the social collective. The issue of the social collective action coming together through intention, but also our personal safety. The U.S. is rather self-protective. You know, the U.S. has this general idea that the world operates around us. In the U.S., you know, very few of us are really necessarily globally minded. Most citizenry of the U.S. is pretty about self and our individual little nation. So here's our U.S. chart. And here's Pluto in its birth chart, here's Pluto in the sky. Saturn and Pluto, returning to Pluto of the USA chart. There's an example. So I'm going to look at your personal charts when I take a few people here and say, what's happening in your chart in terms of this power dynamic. But a pretty cool thing here is the USA chart has Saturn of structure and Pluto of power, restructuring corporate power, on top of Pluto, opposite the USA sun. The sun is one's consciousness, the essence of one's being. Your conscious egoic nature, the sun sign. Cancer, July 4th. Pluto and Saturn, opposite the USA chart, a restructuring of the body. It's like when Pluto opposed the USA Venus, money, that was 2008 through 10, a restructuring of the USA money. We have Saturn doing the same exact thing right now. The beginnings of a restructuring of our national economy, the money of the USA. That's the groove right now. That's what's on tap, nationally speaking. The UK chart, Saturn and Pluto sitting right on top of the UK, United Kingdom sun. So the UK is going through a death and rebirth. Have we seen that? It's called Brexit. So major revision of the UK and its political corporate structure, yet again. The Federal Reserve was born in 1914. The Federal Reserve chart has the same thing. Its sun is Capricorn, 1 degree Capricorn, December 23rd, the solstice, right? Pluto, Saturn on top of the Federal Reserve chart. The essence of the Federal Reserve, its existence is in question right now. Whether it will be dismantled or in some way restructured. Let's see now, who sought to dismantle the Federal Reserve? Oh, that's right, his name was JFK. I wonder how that went. Not too well. So we see Pluto, Saturn in the chart for the Federal Reserve, opposite Saturn and Pluto there. I'm going to run the Saturn, Pluto in the Federal Reserve chart. So again, restructuring. When the Federal Reserve was born, that was 1914. What happened in 1914? World War I. And World War I was about what? Massive restructuring of power. And ultimately, Treaty of Versailles, wasn't it? So we had the Western Allied powers, Great Britain, the US. We had the Ottoman Empire. So we had this polarity again, restructuring of power. That was when the Federal Reserve was born. So restructuring of power is the theme. The last time Pluto-Saturn was doing its thing. Then we had the end of World War II. Remember? Pluto about death and rebirth. Pluto, the god Pluto. Pluto Hades about the god of the underworld, death and rebirth. Saturn, Pluto was together at the end of World War II. Together there in the sign of Leo. Right now, we have Saturn, Pluto opposing that. So we are again, those structures that were birthed at the end of World War II, and of course there was a bit of destruction. There were a number of societies that were radically decimated, frankly. We do see what happened to Germany and what happened to Japan during the end of World War II, during the latter months, the latter years of World War II. Again, it's about power restructuring, massive power restructuring. Iraq's chart, Pluto, Saturn in the outer sky, transiting in the sky, opposite the Iraq sun. The chart for Iran is a little bit unclear. Some use the time that the Shah of Iran took power, the Ayatollah came back, second round for power, but a lot of people also use the Iran Islamic Republic chart of April 1st, 1979. Again, we have in that chart Pluto opposite the sun of Iran, and right now in the sky, Saturn and Pluto together, opposite Jupiter and square the sun, 90 degrees square the sun, like an opposition, but half an opposition, internal tension. So Iran's chart's getting hit. China's chart, Pluto, Saturn in the sky in the outer wheel, on Mars and Uranus in the China chart. Again, a restructuring, sort of an explosive restructuring happened. Also a restructuring around technology for China. Obviously, China's had this massive technological rebirth in the last decade, really from a sort of a rural to an economic engine. But right now, China's at a turning point. So, going to go to charts now in a second. So you get the gist of Saturn and Pluto is about restructuring. It's about national and international restructuring. Last time Saturn and Pluto did its thing was, say, 2014, that was World War I. Then the end of World War II, Saturn and Pluto, massive restructuring, again, of power. We're there at that cycle right now. Astrologers love to look at cycles, love to look at cycles going way back, but the recent history says something interesting here. 1914, 1945, 1947, here we are. 2012, 2015, 2019, 2020 particularly, massive restructuring. So bring up the chart, you can kind of go to reduce that. Excellent. Do me a favor, bring up the USA chart one more time, which is the second one down there. Just double click on that, please. Thank you, Monica. So the USA chart is kind of interesting. You know, astrologers love to work with patterns too. So I said again, this horizon line, this horizontal line that cuts every chart in half. The upper half of the wheel is what you can visibly see in the sky. When I look at your charts, that means whatever planets are in the upper half of the wheel, that's what the outer world sees about your nature. Your nature. So if somebody has the moon at the top of the chart, that means the collective outer world sees your emotional nature. In this case, the moon of the USA chart is down below. Astrologers like to look at little interesting tidbits, like George Bush I, Sr., I believe had his Mars conjunct the USA moon. Ronald Reagan, I think, also had his Mars in his personal chart conjunct the USA moon. In other words, comparing a person's chart to the nation that they govern is an important, interesting tool. Kind of like taking your wife or husband's chart and comparing it to yours. Or if you're a mother or a father, comparing your chart to the chart of your child. How do you interact and have sort of cultural, social, egoic, soulful impact on one another?
But the, you know, the birth of the U.S. defining it as, the birth of the U.S. defining it as, you know, July 4th, 1776, there's so much randomness. They could have fooled around with the draft for another 3 months.
Yes, and what you would,
do you see a cause and effect?
The reason I want to do individual charts is that you will see a cause and effect personally. When you start doing that, when you start studying it, that's the thing about astrology. You approach it from a scientific standpoint. We're taught in science that astrology is utter nonsense. But yet, what we're discovering is the ancients are quite brilliant, that a lot of their idea systems were not born in a complete nonsense. It's really about this idea of as above, so below. These days we loosely call it quantum physics. That physics is proving the interrelationship of the everything. The interrelationship of the everything. So when you start studying it yourself, as I did it as an amateur telescope builder, an amateur astronomer, my folks thought I'd for sure be going to science. As I was 10 years old building a microscope by myself, and 11 and 12 building telescopes without the reverse of help actually. But think, okay, this guy will be a scientist. But astrology hit me as it does for most people who first get into astrology as this weird thing, this weird aberration. But once you start studying, it becomes addictive because why? This incredible system is this amazing mirror. The chart doesn't make you something you're not or that you are. It's just a mirror. I always say the chart's exactly like going to the hairdresser. You're having a bad hair day, and the mirror is not doing it to you. The mirror is just showing what's going on. And this is just a giant mirror of cycles that we're all interwoven with. All these charts are really kind of cool that way. You'll see when I take some personal charts. Yes? Sorry. Well, that's appropriate, though. Do I have Donald Trump's chart? Yes, we're going to go look at that in a second. So the USA charts is a powerful chart. Look at this interesting chart pattern. They call it a funnel pattern or a fan pattern, like a Japanese fan, where you have a handle at the bottom and the rest of the chart up top. So the Pluto South Node Moon forms the handle, the Japanese fan, the handle of the USA chart. Our feelings, our collective emotions are kind of the driving force for the umbrella of the US, the larger part of the chart.
Do you want to
Go to Donald Trump. What planet is that? This red guy.
Mars?
Mars is the god of
War.
Right. So in a chart, the rising sign, or that early portion of the chart, describes how you take your collective self and pull it together. The rising sign, it's called the ascendant of your chart, or the rising sign of your personal chart. Three things in a chart, three pillars. One's ego sign, sun sign. One's conscious nature. One's moon sign, one's subconscious, subliminal. And the rising sign, literally, what's rising? If I took you out that morning of Donald Trump's birth, and if I could have eclipsed that sun at 22 degrees of Gemini and obscured the sun, you would have said, wow, Alexander, what's that orangey star below the sun? What's that yellowish star with a super white star? Right? You'd see the planets. Telescope easily show them exactly in that orientation to the local horizon. And Mars had just risen when Donald Trump was born. So to an astrologer, the coincidence, the mirror is, the way he pulls himself together internally and then begins to rise to the outer world is through Mars. He was, in fact, a student at the military academy when he was a young man. He certainly can be said to be more of a hawk than a dove. And what's rising also? In what sign? The sign of Leo. In fact, that particular degree is the heart of a lion. It's in the constellations of the stars. If I point at the constellation of Leo, the bright star in Leo, Regulus, the heart of the lion, 29 degrees of Leo. That's one of the 4 royal stars that mark the seasonal changes for the Egyptians. Particularly, that particular star, 29 Leo, the heart of the lion, that is the royal star of royal stars. How does Donald Trump see himself?
Royal lion.
As a royal lion. That's exactly right. Exactly right. He is a Gemini, and Gemini sun, that's May, June. Gemini is an air sign, conceptual, when you take exams in school, right? So that's the time that he was imprinted as a baby. And what are Geminis known to be about? Duality, but really multiplicity. Do we see any evidence of multiplicity in his nature? For a Capricorn, wintertime, like me, January, February, right? Capricorn, Aquarius. It's not about playful, not about playtime, it's about survival. So Capricorn, Aquarius, like Richard Nixon, it's Capricorn. It's about what's real, what's tangible, not conceptual. Either it's freezing or it's not. Either you survive or you don't. You have food or you don't. You have wood to burn or you don't. It's about real function. Gemini is conceptual, May, June. You're heading into summertime, heading into freedom, heading into freeing yourself. It's about mental freedom. And so there is this multiplicity. For many Geminis, think about it, Geminis, facts are kind of depending upon your viewpoint. For a Capricorn, it's like, no, water boils at 212 Fahrenheit at sea level. That's what water does, science. Gemini, it's like, well, it depends on what your truth is. It's like Bill Clinton saying, it depends on what the meaning of is, whatever. That kind of Gemini and duplicity. So that's an interesting chart, a powerful chart. It says that his emotions and his feelings and his family are really something that he really holds private, and that's really important to him. It says that he's an extroverted extrovert, springtime baby, daytime extroverted extrovert. He's got the planet Uranus of revolution. When Uranus was discovered, French-American industrial revolutions, he is the epitome of revolution himself. He's a revolutionary, and that's his whole premise. That bring me into the White House, and I'll revolutionize this mess for you. Okay.
Hitler's chart.
I do have Hitler's chart. It should be in there. If you can go up to chart.
My chart?
Yep. Drop down. Go to open. Type in search all files. Type in Hitler. Hitler was a Taurus Aries. That's April 4th thereabouts. Taurus Aries. That is roughly the same birth date as Saddam Hussein. By the way, not all people born April 21st, 20th are like Hitler and Saddam, but it ain't that rare to take a ram in a bowl, that energy, that sub-season sort of imprint. So do you find, yeah, double click. And then double click on the chart in the blue highlight. Oops, nope.
Oh.
Yep. There you go. So we have Uranus, discovered during French-American revolutions. So he's got Uranus rising. How does this guy rise? In an Iranian, offbeat, eccentric, breakthrough kind of a way. And he was. He was a powerful breakthrough. What planet is next to his sun there, just above it? Mars. So Sun, Mars. So Sun, one's essential energy, Mars, the god of war. Sun Mars people tend to be rather blustery, aggressive. He also had Venus, exactly next to Mars. And Venus is a planet of love and artistry. Not common, rather not uncommon to have Venus, Mars together with artists. And of course, he was an artist for a little while when he was younger. He also had Uranus opposing Mercury, Sun. Mercury is mercurial, like, the planet, those 88-day orbit, right? Mercurial, intellectual, linear mind. So linear mind and breakthrough Uranus, typical mark of a genius, believe it or not. Usually Uranus, Pluto, Uranus, Mercury, other oppositions are really brilliant people, super smart, really fast mind. I don't know that he was known to be that brilliant, but this says he was a very fast mind. There was something else that can happen when you have Uranus with Mercury. Uranus can be not infrequently found when there is, very brilliant intelligence. You know what they say about brilliant intelligence, right? Kind of a fine line. So a lot of times you'll find Uranus really hardwired or hard aspected in the chart when a person struggles with stability. He's got Saturn structure at the top of his chart. That says a little bit about him. Moon at the bottom of the chart says he's really emotionally internal. And again, his family and his private life is kept very private. Same with Donald Trump, has the same theme. There's always more. There's always more to dig into. So let's take some examples here. So that gal had asked before, what's your first name?
Caitlin.
Caitlin. Okay, so what's your day, month, and year of birth? So go to new. Okay, put in Caitlin. Or just K. Just put
Yeah,
K.
I was gonna say
Okay.
so many ways
Your
to
day,
thought.
and your day, month, and year of birth?
19 November
Okay, so 11/19, what year?
1987.
87.
Right.
Highlight the whole thing.
Oh, okay.
Just highlight the whole thing, all in one big, that's it. Put 11/19/1987. And you can even just do 11 space, 19 space.
Oh, okay.
Just future.
Will,
What time
will
of-
this work?
But you have to go 1987.
1987.
There you go. Now down the time.
8:20 p.m.
Okay, 8:20 p.m. And you just do 8 space 20 and
Oh,
P,
okay.
and P. And that will do it. Yep, where are you born?
Waukesha.
Okay. That's a tough one to spell, but
Yeah, WAUKESHA, Wisconsin.
WI, of course.
Yeah, actually should find it right.
You have to hit WI, though. You have to hit the state. Otherwise, it'll go worldwide.
Austria.
WI. And then you get it.
Did it again.
And even if you hit OK, in the bottom right, double click on that for Caitlin, right? Okay. So Caitlin's a November 19th baby. She's a Scorpio on the cusp of Sag. What season is that?
Winter.
It's winter, it's early winter. So if she's a Scorpio, I mean, you're talking November. What's happening in the environment in Waukesha, Wisconsin? October, November? It's not dead winter yet, is it? No, there are a few creatures that are still stirring that may not make it through Sub-Zero. So Scorpio. So that's when things like insects typically pass away. It's nature. Things that can't survive Sub-Zero begin to pass away. Scorpio's about death and rebirth. So Caitlin's nature is about death and rebirth. Her nature is about inner plumbing, the inner sanctum of self. Like all Scorpions that you've heard of, inner sanctum. Okay, so that's true of her. She's also a nighttime baby. So is she an extrovert or an introvert?
Introvert.
So she's born as a wintertime baby, fall, winter, introvert, and a nighttime baby. So she's an introvert and an introvert. And when you vibe her, when you see her, I mean, we all can sense each other. That's one premise. I always say when I teach, look around the room, you can feel each other. You know who's hyper, who's quiet. You know who's fiery and blustery, who's more sedate and more mindful. You know who's intellectual. You can feel a person's intellectuality. That mind that's sort of sizzling versus a person who's all feeling and emotion. And oftentimes the body form will show that too. It's all one creature. So Caitlin definitely is not like sitting over there as a ball of fire. We don't see her ready to blast off the floor. And you can feel it. When you go through chart to chart, you'll see my point here. So you can tell and see she's internal. Even as an art therapist, I was trained in art therapy, even the colors she's wearing, whatever color outfit you're wearing today is what you typically kind of wear. So if we're dressed in red, then there's an element in a person's chart, that's right, this lady, if you're dressed in red, there's an element in your chart that's going to mirror that there's a fiery side of you. There's a fiery side of you, and we definitely know that lady dressed in red is a person who will intellectually consider what she's thinking, but she will tell you straight out if you ask her what the hell she thinks. And you look at her, it's obvious, right? So when you see her chart, it's going to scream the same thing. As above, so below. Everything's mirrored. That's the cool thing about life. So Caitlin definitely is internal. She's more quiet. You can see and feel her energy is quiet. And the chart is all internal. She has this big stellium in the bottom of her chart. What's really weird, you see she's got this planet up there at the top. What planet is that, Liam? The very top of the chart.
Well, there's the North Node.
Well, forget that. Forget the node. Come back to that.
Jupiter.
And Jupiter is also known as Jove. Jovial. So the outer world sees Caitlin as jovial. So in the career sector, they see her as live and let live Caitlin, right? Playful, outgoing. But the moon Pluto is at the bottom of her chart. So she is private. And also too, as of the 1920s, when psychology hit astrology, they said, well, the moon describes where mommy's consciousness was when you were born. Where was your mom when you were giving birth? Where was she in her own development? And your sun sign describes your father and his consciousness when you were an infant coming into his life. So in this case, we have a new moon baby, the moon just before the sun. So mom and dad are together when Caitlin was born, and both of them are introverted. Both of them are quiet people. Both of them are internal. Plutonium's right next to that moon. So mom's got this plutonium. Mom's got this deep, aggressive, internal, powerful nature. Mars is not too far with Mercury also. So when mom gets it on and gets really pissed off, Mercury, analytical, verbal, Mars, aggressive. She's like an attorney, she's like a lawyer. She's really intense. And when mom loses it, she's the one who's really the taskmaster of this household. Is that right? I think it's interesting. I haven't been doing this a long time, I can assure you. So that says that mom's very deep and like psychologically deep and profound and probing, like a psychotherapist type. But she's got a bit of a bite there, a bit of an analytical bite to her, and a bit of a verbal, mental bite to her. You're not going to get that with your father. Your father's more conservative. He's more of an engineering type of personality like you are. You're more your father's daughter, is what this chart says. Genetically, you have more than analytical engineering style. That Pluto-Saturn thing, where is that falling in her chart? It's falling in her house of marriage over here, the seventh house, that sunset part of her chart. So she's going through phases of her life where she's reviewing relationships and reviewing herself in relationships and reviewing what it is to be in a relationship and reviewing her identity with relationships. Those are very, very big themes right now in terms of deep personal review. You just came out of Saturn and Sag, well, all of us did the last 3 years. That was let's see, 2014, 15 through 17, 18. Saturn of structure went across your Venus Saturn over there. And so it said, either the marriage or the dissolution, restructuring of relationship and marriage. So you just came out of a marital sort of ending, but it was a contractual marriage isn't the point. You came out of a relationship ending. That was a long, powerful relationship and one you thought would stay with you, but you restructured, you changed as well. Not only because of that relationship, but you matured in a way and discovered things about you. That's what that cycle would normally, the combination of cycle would hold. So I'm curious if that makes sense to you.
In which year?
Like 2015, 16, 17 particularly. It would have been like dead on in 2016 into 17. That would have been the final termination.
Yeah.
And it was a marital relationship. Whether it was contractual wasn't the point. It was serious. It was powerful. You were restructuring your life around it, and you restructured your life at that time. So I don't know for sure. There's always free will, but I know cycles and how most of us respond to cycles. What we'll likely do with certain cycles, and how a chart is structured tells me more about also what a person's likely to do under certain circumstances. Let's get somebody else. Thank you, Katie. So, okay, the gal in red's we're going to see what's going on here. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to tune in to your gut. I always say that I've taught you a little bit about astrology here, but I want you to look at how a chart feels. Remember, the upper half of the wheel is what the outer world sees. The lower half is what's internal. So her chart was lower chart, so she's a really internal person, right? So we're going to see what happens with this gal. So what's your first name?
Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
So,
May 19, 1956. I can't see the screen.
That,
when you say
that's
it.
05.
So you just do 1956?
Mhm.
Right. So I know 56, that was,
2:38 a.m.
yeah, that was a Pluto Leo generation. That was a Uranus and Cancer Leo generation, I believe, as well.
Minneola.
Yeah, I was born in Mineola too.
Hey.
How do you spell Manila?
Mineola.
M-I-N.
Mineola. Mineola. That's it. New York. Excellent. Hit OK. Double check on Nancy again. Okay, so remember above the chart is what the outer world sees, sort of mythically, if you will. And we see what's about to set in the western end of her sky there. What's about to set there, right when she was born? What planet? The moon. So she was born just before moonset. And her moon's at 24 Virgo, exactly where my moon is in my chart, by the way. So emotionally, like we're on the exact same. We process things analytically, emotionally, analytically, for sure. Just above moon is Neptune, above that Saturn, so she's a pragmatist. So the outer world experiences Nancy to be quite pragmatic. But Saturn is late Scorpio, almost in Sag, so she's free thinker. She's a free thinker, but she's also scholarly, whatever she does, maybe a teacher, a natural practical teacher. And what planet is rising there?
Mars.
Remember, who had the Mars rising when we first threw up the wheel? Donald Trump. So there's an element where Mars rises. What color is Mars?
Red.
Yeah, and what is she wearing? Yeah, and that's not rare for her. There's this fiery, passionate quality. So she's got the subdued Saturn quality up there on the one hand. She's emotional and analytical, moon Virgo. Virgo's analytical Earth, analytical emotions. But her feeling state is there. You know, there's a quality of being emotionally analytical, and there's a little bit of a librarianist quality of analytics to your gestalt. But that Mars, man, that's a powerful singleton. The entire chart. She has a hemispheric pattern. But Mars is the outlier here. So she's trained in conservatism. So Dad was very conservative, very analytical, very professorial type of analytical kind of nature, that part of the chart. But that Mars is a square to it, man. So she's got this, what's called a bucket chart. John Lennon had a bucket chart. He had the moon at the top of his chart, his emotions, his home, and the outer world. John Lennon, right? Yoko and John did a whole great sleep in. So the outer world saw his private life. And then John Lennon had this whole bucket chart. He was really an introvert with the emotions in the outer world. She's got this whole bucket chart, but that Mars, so Mars is in the 12th house of the chart, that 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. region. What do you do between 6 and 8 a.m.? In astrology, they call it the realm of repose or meditation. I call it the don't bother me until I have my coffee time of the chart, between 6 and 8 in the morning. She's got that Mars there. So she wakes up Mars, fast. She wakes up, she's intense, she's on it, and you do not want to mess around with Nancy when she's just woken up. You know, and she's very private. So she keeps her martial energy internal to herself. But she is obviously quite explosive. She's a Taurus on the cusp of Gemini. Her sign Bull. She's got this kind of slow-moving, slow-going way. But she's got that Mercury sun in Gemini. Think of Donald Trump, Gemini. So there's a quality of her being very slow-moving and slow-going, but she's also got this super fast mind and super sort of intelligent, directive mind. Also, too, that pattern of Sun and Mercury are opposite Saturn of structure. So she's all about facts. Just like your dad, you are your father's daughter genetically. She's all about facts, what's factual and what's not factual. There's two possibilities, accurate and inaccurate. Just like your dad, right? Yep. So those are foundational. What we don't see about her too much is that Venus at the bottom of the chart in the area of home and family. A lot of love. So she's actually very loving. Venus in Cancer. Cancer, summertime sign, warm. So she's warm and loving. Venus, love. Cancer, summertime, nurturing. She's a nurturing romantic lover. She's really quite the romantic, this one. And all quite internal. So in her inner world, she's really an author, she's a writer, she's written a bunch of things already. She's quite the poet and the artist, a bit of a writer, a bit of a dancer. If she could be, she would. But there's the visual artist is in there. Mars is rising, so she's impatient, so she's probably into photography. She has no patience for things instant. But we see, and then we have that Uranus with Venus. So Uranus, remember revolutionary? Venus, love. So she gets into revolutionary loves. So she dates really oddballs. So she's kind of turned on by me a little bit because she's like, this guy's really curious. She likes things that are curious and offbeat. Thank you. Yeah. Well, we wouldn't get each other, I'll say that. The problem is that you and I are both total fuss budgets. That's how I got divorced to begin with. I'm a total Felix Unger. So, you know, you and I are a pain in the ass with that. We drive each other crazy. And of course, with your impatience, you would not have it for long. But of course, that helps.
Let's put your chart on this chart that I'm on.
You want my chart on this chart? I don't think we should do that. You know, well, her Venus is 6 degrees of Cancer. You know where my Mars is? 5 degrees of Cancer. Yeah, that's a no. It's a little bit worse. But, yeah, that would be, yeah, interesting. So anyway, moving right along. So, what? Come back to her.
At least.
No, I was talking about figuratively. I know we gotta watch our time here. So, yeah, we're doing good. So, where is that Pluto-Saturn thing in her chart? So it's crossing the top of her chart the last 3-4 years. So she did a major career restructuring, or they restructured her, I can't know for sure, and have to do a little bit more work. Saturn is right now dead opposite her Venus. Pluto was there in 2011, so I know that one. And she's right down the road from here, so I know what that's all about. So your marriage blew apart in 2011 also, huh? Or something died, marital death. That was a major relational death. That was the last straw of it. It had been crawling along for quite a long time, but it finally crapped out in 2011. I know it did. And so Saturn right now is opposing that. So the whole past year, you've had the final death knell on that one. You finally let go. You finally got over it. It took you 7 years, 8 years to do that. That's right. And so yeah, so we're gonna move on. Does it make sense to you? Is it like exactly? Is it exactly right or kind of right?
It is very close to go.
Yeah, no, I just, if I do a little research, better, but, I'm kind of in a public forum here, so. So right now, Saturn, Pluto's at the top of your chart and saying that you're at the beginning of the last year and a half of having all your friendships go through a death and rebirth as well. So the people that you kept company with for most of your life, a lot of them have exited your life or passed away literally, maybe literally, not, and you're exiting from their life. You're like excising them. So you're changing your entire sort of community around you and what you identify as other, for reinforcing self, right? That's been the last year and a half especially, right? That's right. You should know, right? Well, she's wearing the red sweater. You gotta watch out. When she puts that red sweater on, it's worrisome.
It's in my daily life, not my soul sister, but.
Who else has a red sweater? That's very good. Exactly right. Okay, somebody else. Yeah.
You cannot do this if you don't know when someone was born.
What time of the day they're born?
Yeah.
But-
Like my mother's.
If I don't know what time of
Surprising.
So you're asking, can I not do this if I don't know what time of day they're born?
Yeah.
That's not true. I mean, technically speaking, 4 minutes of time makes a difference. So when you have the right time of birth, it's like a download. I mean, you can feel it. So when we talk about Caitlin, you can feel who she is. You can look at the chart, extrovert, introvert, other, self, right? You can feel the person. And when the time of birth is on, it's just like a psychic download, like dog smell fear, We discount our intuition. We are taught by science to not tune into your gut, except women kind of do, women, children particularly. But, you can feel it. You can feel everybody sitting here. You can feel who we are. We know who each other are. We really do. And when the chart is right, it resonates like a crystal ball. When the time of birth is off, something's just askew. Something doesn't quite work. So when you don't have a time of birth, you're right. You can't get to the nuances as quickly. But the planetary placements in a given day are going to be relatively the same. Just where is it in the sky? Is the sun overhead? Is the sun down below? How is a person oriented to reality, and how do they naturally manifest that? How do they orient themselves to manifest? That's the time of birth. But you can do a hell of a lot with just a date, a tremendous amount. But, example, there's tens of thousands of people born in a given day. So, my former wife was an identical twin, a mirror twin. So her sister, I would never have married her sister, nor would she have married me. We were completely not alike. But my former wife, 25 years. So, does the chart show that? In very infinitesimal small ways. It's not easy. It really takes a little more expertise to suss that out, you know. But yeah, you can tell a hell of a lot by just the day, month, and year. The time is just like, you know, that's when that's when the laser light goes on. You know? Yeah. So anybody else who wants to mention? The gentleman over here, the skeptic. So yeah. So you're raising for her?
No, she's raising.
There you go. Okay. What's your first name?
Mitchell,
Hey Mitchell, welcome. So day, month, and year?
5/18/56.
Oh, all right. So you can just go to the middle button, and reduce that middle button.
Oh, this one.
5/18.
Yes.
So you did for the day before, the other guy.
Yes.
Wow. Now who was born? Who was that other chart? Oh, so it was Nancy. But no, so we have the identical chart. Case in point. Check this out. So 5/18/56, same year, same birthday, in one day. Okay. What color is he wearing? He's wearing maroon. Okay, they're both the same chart. It's the same chart. They're like siblings. And the same year. So are they going to be alike? Hell of a lot alike. All the things that is said to Nancy are going to apply to him a great deal of the way. But the time of birth will sort of mute or change or augment it. That's what's going to go down here. Like, you know, when I lived in Seacliff, Long Island, you know, I moved in and the guy next door to me said, oh, well, welcome, you know, my name is Mark. Oh, gee, and I said, well, I'm an astrologer. Okay, what's your birth date? Same birth date as me. He was in the same ward. He was in Mineola Hospital. He was in the same ward. He was born that morning, I was born at night. We had crazy, freaky similarities that went down. Like even one of his tires went flat and smoke blue smoke. The next morning I get in my car and I get my tire goes flat, same tire goes, smokes blue smoke. It was really, yeah, oh yeah, we had many, and he was anti-astrology, all this stuff. He was the inverse of my chart. All of his girlfriends were into it, the opposite people, right? Anyway, so this is incredible. So everything I said to Nancy applies to Mitchell a hell of a lot. He's going to be a bowl chart with that Mars all by itself. So Mitchell, the guy next to you, you know this person, right? So Mitchell can be also like Nancy. He's very, very aggressive, intensive, and, you know, impatient. There's like this quality of sort of leader, directive, you know, we can't hold him back. But depends on the time of day, whether it's extrovert or introvert. So what time of day?
I don't know exactly. It's in the morning, 6 o'clock.
Well, before, so wait, how close to midnight? How close to midday? Where?
6 o'clock.
How do you sure within an hour or two?
Within an hour.
Sunrise, baby.
Yeah.
Okay, so throw down 6 a.m. And this 6 A is good. In Mineola, or where are you born?
Brooklyn, New York.
That's the same thing. You can for astrology, the astrology is the purest. You want it to write down. It's within, it's so close. I mean, the map will be infinitesimal. Just hit yes. You can go Kings County, bottom, double click. Yeah. There you go. Okay. So Nancy was born as an evening birth with Mars rising, and he's born as a sunrise baby with Mars overhead. So the outer world's going to see Mitchell in what way? Aggressive, assertive, directive, willful. And the job, they'll see him as effective and directive. That's his nature. You know, he gets in there, he does the job, he's after it, he directs things. He's a sunrise baby. Remember I said George W., I'm the decider, and Barack Obama, sunset, let's come together. So what kind of personality is George? Is Mitchell?
WF.
Well, he's sunrise. And so he identifies himself, Gemini rising, think Donald Trump, although he's not a great example. But so stubborn, he's a stubborn personality, Taurus, with Gemini, Mercury, and Gemini rising. His son's almost in Gemini, cusp Gemini, so I read it as both. Stubborn, with a lot of Gemini in him. So he's a stubborn-minded. And he rises with his own sense of core self. So it's the Mitchell show. It's really about what Mitchell feels, what Mitchell wants. He's self-directed. He does not like to march to the beat of anybody else's drumbeat. No freaking way will he do that. You know? He is totally his father's son genetically, and when you were born, since sun rising, your father was completely about my son being born. He was very ego-identified with it. Saturn's on the marriage cusp when you were born, opposite that. So the marriage, when you were born, that marriage was struggling. It was at a rough time. You came in at a rough time. Saturn, structure, opposing daddy, your father just changed the job. He just acquired a new job or just had an ending in the job. So it added more stress to your father and more stress to his identification of self. That's an important piece. Mom's down here with Pluto, the moon, and that Jupiter conjunction. Note the moon is 12 degrees Virgo. So you have to write down on May 18th, day before, right? So moon is 12 degrees Virgo, not late Virgo. So that moon early to Pluto, here we have a jovial mom, Jupiter Jove with Pluto, like a mom who's very powerful, but conjunct to that moon. So mom is moon Virgo, like my moon Virgo, analytical emotion. But here mom's very much like a lioness. She's very protective. With Nancy was much more analytical mother, who was more artistic analytic, like mine. Your mother was much more the queen of the men. She dominated and ran the freaking show. So we had a powerful father who felt dominated by a powerful mother. The matriarchy was more powerful than the patriarchy in this family. Your father also came, Saturn opposing the sun. Your father came from a divided family of his own, whether his father stayed or not. Dad was there, not there for, but dominating patriarchy for your father. Dominating patriarchy that was not really there for your dad. This pattern is what your father was raised in, continued with you. But the dominating matriarchy, your mother and your mother's mother was very dominating and powerful, much more than the Leonian queen on the May. She really ran the show at the bottom of the chart. So this means that, is this your husband? So he's very deeply emotional, very deeply, big teddy bear. He's very much about protecting the family. He'd be a great teacher, great educator, because he's very, very, and with Mars of sports on top, who knows, he kind of looks like a bit of varsity, whatever, he's got the jocks, he's still wearing it. He's still doing the high school crap. But that hasn't changed one iota. You were an athlete, weren't you? And you could have been a semi-pro athlete, couldn't you?
No.
I disagree. That's not what that says. That tells me you were a lot more advanced than you're giving truth to here.
Moon and Virgo.
He's being humble and Virgo tends, well, Mother Teresa is the best example of Virgo energy. They're about service. So his mother's about service, you're about service. Your husband is about service and giving of himself. Even though he's quite egoic in a way to sort of fight this egoic energy with mother and father and their inner dynamic. Notice that moon sun, that moon Pluto is square. See the big square? Square the sun. Internal conflict between emotions and his own egoic nature. That's what that implies. He struggles between being self-directed and independent and a leader and being a follower and giving and yielding and serving. He struggles between those two poles. I'll check in. Does that make sense for you?
Yeah.
Notice how this is much more muted, right? This issue of the bottom of the chart is much more, it's all about internal. He's much more internal, except for his actions in the job where he's directive. He's mostly, he's born as a springtime, so he's an extrovert, but his whole chart's internal. So he's like an introverted extrovert, which hits him, that's exactly right, isn't it, about your husband? Introverted extrovert. He's social, but he's really introverted. He'd rather be at home. One last one. Okay, this guy over here.
Which one?
Hi, I'm Roseanne.
Roseanne. Okay. It's one of those names these days that's carrying a big punch. Okay, what's your name over
Not
here?
spelled like that.
Okay.
April 3rd, 1969.
Okay, so 4/3/69. So 4/3, she's an Aries. What season is that?
That is extrovert.
Extrovert. That's springtime. That's early spring. Remember I mentioned April 1st, we had 4 feet of snowpack, and then 9 inches of rain. So Roseanne's got this like powerful fire. She's one of the few people who's not wearing red right now. So it's going to be curious to see where her ruling planet Mars is, because there's a fieriness to Roseanne. But I'm wondering if she's an evening birth. Let's see. What time of day?
2:24 p.m.
Okay, so she's an afternoon birth. Let's see what happens. Where are you born? There you go. Hit OK. Double click on Kings. There you go.
Monica, you're doing a great job.
You were doing a great job. Excellent. Way to go. So like Donald Trump, she's got the same degree rising.
Hey!
Leo, which ruled by the sun. So there's this quality of her being very, you're not wearing the right colors, Roseanne. Normally you're wearing brighter colors, I would say. You're a little more flamboyant,
She's from Brooklyn.
This is about as colorful as I
Wow. I'm going to say at some point in your life, you're going to transform that black to different things. Normally this is a person who's much more, but there is an interesting piece. She's got Mercury, then Sun, then Venus, then Saturn. And Saturn's kind of wintertime, Capricorn. It's a little more, it's going to say the person's going to be Capricornian, stoic. Up in that part of the chart, around 2 p.m. are people who are educators. Educators, teachers, professorial types. So we do know Roseanne, like her father, again, her father's daughter genetically. Like your father, you're very analytical, sort of scholarly, studying. You're very much about details and being informed, is what that implies. You're almost a full moon baby. You're born just after the full moon. Moon down here, sun opposite. So full moon babies, they are either mom and dad on one side or the other. There's an internal balance struggle problem issue when you're born. There's also a quality of you trying to keep the balance. Venus next to her sun, goddess of balance. This is a person who came from mom and dad who were polar opposites. They were like, how the hell did these two get married? Is what you're asking.
Oh, yeah.
Completely opposite. Your father is like the stoic, analytical, sort of rationalist, powerful individual. All that Aries and that Saturn. He's very self-possessed. He's very self-possessed. Your mom, Moon Uranus conjunction. She's kind of offbeat and all over the place, like you. There's an emotional quality where you're a lot like your mom. You're a bit of a genius. Your mom's a bit of a genius. She's also a bit of a kook. Your mom's really kind of kooky. I mean, she's got this quality of being a little bit. It's on mom's side of the family. All families have this. So all families have substance issues and all kinds of stuff. We all have brain chemistry issues. Mom's got that trip. Mom's got that, and she struggles with that. That's a whole different kettle of fish. Your father's a complete rationalist. Your mother's more the histrionic. Your mom's real powerful. I mean, she taught you really how to dig and probe and get into things, not avoid them. Of course, sometimes you want to say, Mom, can you just let it go? She can't. Your father's a total rationalist and also pragmatic. In 1 + 1 = 2. It's formulaic. So they're completely opposites in that way. So as a full moon baby, you're really about both. You're really about balancing both and embracing both, is what this chart suggests. Where that Pluto-Saturn is transiting right now, it's just come off your Mars, that Saturn, for the last 2 years. You restructured a job about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, probably. You might have also done some building or rebuilding. We're out on the home, quite literally, bottom part of the chart's the physical nest. So you might have done some rebuilding. And you did have Saturn cross your moon. That was, let's see, that's 6 years ago. So roughly about 6 years ago, Saturn crossing the moon, you had a restructuring of home, a moving cycle. 6 years ago, 6.5? Which is 6 or 6.5?
More like 5.
Okay, I gotta look at the charts. It's faster if I do it that way. But, so the bottom part of your chart's been hit. Oh, you just also had Uranus of revolution at the top of your chart for the last 2 years. It's back in Aries for a few months. So that says that you have just come through this whole restructuring of your career identity over the last 5 years. And last year particularly, now it crossed over the Uranus of restructuring and divorce, just crossed over your Venus-Saturn. So not rare for there to be a divorce or restructuring in a relationship. It's really calling for revolution from within, sort of waking consciousness, Uranus cycles. Can we wake up and revolutionize together, or do we need to part? So you had a classic divorce cycle in the last year and a half, and you're back at the last 3 months of it. This is kind of cleanup time. I can't tell if it wasn't partying, but probably. Usually it is. Yeah. It was partying, right?
What?
Partying.
Pardon.
Yeah. So.
Can I ask something?
Yes.
Can you talk about the significance of retrogrades in a chart?
So Monica wants to know about retrogrades in a chart. So how many hands have heard of retrograde Mercury? Cool, these days a lot of people, right? So what is retrograde? It means that one planet's orbit is different than another. Its orbital speed is different. A good example of retrograde is you're at a traffic light. Your foot's on the brake of your car, and the car next to you moves, and you ram your brake to make sure you're stopped, right? That's relative motion. That's like retrograde, one planet catching up with another. It's visual. So astronomically, planets do their orbital thing like the moon does, crescent moon, half moon, full moon, natural cycles. But it's all perspective. That's what retrogrades are all about. So retrogrades, because of orbital speeds, one planet in the starry background can appear to slow down night after night and stop and go backwards, the heavenly background, because of orbital speeds. That's what retrogrades are. It's like internalization, a planet going backwards visually, internal energy. So when she has a lot of retrogrades in her chart, what does it mean? It means that those portions of Roseanne's character structure are really more introverted than extroverted. So the paternal lineage piece, where she is her father's daughter genetically, says her father's very extroverted, Aries, shoot first, ask questions later. That's Roseanne's egoic nature, her son, light of consciousness. But her mother is the reverse. It's really internal. The exact opposite. So again, it's like, how the hell did these two get married? They're really like polar opposites. Have they memorized, or for all of us, it's a good thing to think about, have they really considered that I fell in love with you because you enable me to be something I'm not? You complement what I don't have. If we can really focus on that, they could work together, but it must be intentional. But with something so polarized, unless there's a lot of intentional behind it, that polarization will usually. So you get the gist of charts here. I want to really have you understand upper half the wheel, outer world experience, lower half the wheel, internal. Sunrise, the idea of rising consciousness, waking consciousness, re-embodying your body, sunrise. Sunset, you've done the whole outer world thing and you are going within, internalization of self. So when you think of loved ones or children that you may have given birth to, it's easier to objectify this idea and see it, oh yeah, it makes total sense. Springtime into summertime, extrovert. Falling back into winter, fall into winter, introvert. Yeah. Any last questions? We're almost 10 p.m.
Maybe I can understand, maybe I can understand how you can read someone's chart. But what I don't understand, and maybe I missed this, maybe I was a few minutes late arriving, how do you know anything about the person's parents? And that's what.
Because psychology and astrology, when theosophy was really super popular in the 1913s, 1915s, 1920s, certainly into 1935, 1940, when theosophy was really popular, mystical theosophical society, its constructs and popular psychology hit astrology like a freaking bomb. The two just married together beautifully. So at that time, astrologers did something kind of unique. They said the sun position in a chart symbolizes daddy and patriarchy, and the mom position in a chart symbolizes matriarchy. And so that's how you can tell about family structure. That's how you can tell about the genetic imprinted father, the genetic imprinted mother in a chart, and what the consciousness was of those two, what the dynamic was. That's how I know when I look at a person's chart. I can talk about their mother and their father, the grandparents on either side of the family, not always perfectly, but pretty damn close usually. But the important piece is our chart is saying you are part of a family lineage. You're part of a family lineage. You're born to that family because your soul and its own growth and development attracts to that lesson. Like attracts like, more typically. Even if Roseanne's mom and dad were really ultimately polar opposite, some of what they needed to work on a soul level drew them together, to work on that. So that's one reason. The other thing, what's your first name? Sally. The other thing, Sally, is that when you work with astrology, you're working with archetypes, but you're also working with internal intuitive principles. And so this chart, if you have the right time of birth, becomes like this, frankly, becomes like this kind of crystal ball thing. It's almost like it's like the Matrix, like the download just happens. When you have the right time, the download just happens. You can feel it. Just like I said, you can see, that Nancy has definitely got this fiery Mars rising, and, born the same day, practically, same year. Goodness, help me. Mitchell, sorry, thank you, sorry, Mitchell. Mitchell has Mars over the top of his charts. It's a different way of, a different sky, literally. These charts are a literal, exact astronomical sky with a local horizon, time of birth. So the charts mirror the coincidence of everything, how you're plugged into it, how you're born part and parcel of it. And therefore, when you have the right data, it shows how you're part of that flow. So thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank you. I just want to point out that Alexander is available for one-on-one consultations via the spot.